Well, good morning, everybody. This is Chris Morton with AALU Gamma. Thank you for joining us this morning on a very busy time in Washington, and I know a very challenging time for all of you, your businesses, your families, your clients. As we get into the discussion today, inside the stimulus packages that have been some passed and others about to be passed in Washington, I want to start by just saying our foremost concern here at AALU for all of you is your safety and well-being. We hope everyone is following the guidelines associated with the CDC instructions and what the president and the team in Washington, in the administration and on Capitol Hill have put forward for the American people. It's really, really critically important. We will get through this. We will get through this stronger, as you all are aware here. So I just want to extend our well wishes. If there's anything we can do at AALU Gamma, we want to do that. But we have a great deal happening here in Washington. We want to make sure today in particular that you are staying abreast of the developments on Capitol Hill. So many resources that are going to be coming your way for your business and your clients, and make sure that you understand also what we're doing from an advocacy perspective to represent you at this trying time, represent your clients, and make sure that the critical work that you do as financial security professionals gets upheld and a spotlight is shown on it here in Washington, because the solutions that you have in your hands are so paramount right now. For those of you who have been tuning into AALU, and as you've had time and Gamma, we do have some new resources available. Our COVID-19 Action Center on the AALU and Gamma websites, Navigating the Crisis Together, is really meant to provide you with real-time information that helps you with your decision-making and some of the issues that you're going to be facing. So please share with us your feedback on the challenges you're seeing in the marketplace and how we might help. That is what we are here for. That is what this community has been built for times like this. We're going to encourage your questions today. We want to try to get through our content, give you value, but then really spend some time answering your questions. And if we don't get to all those questions, we will certainly be reaching out and following up with those of you who submit questions to make sure you have what you need. The Q&A button on the bottom of the screen is the way to submit those questions, so please keep them coming and we'll try to get to as many as we can. I am absolutely pleased to be joined by two safe and healthy colleagues who are with their families, as we all are at this time. Armstrong Robinson, our Vice President of Legislative Affairs, who runs our policy and lobbying operation here in DC and does such a fantastic job. And our friend and strategist, Josh Holmes, President and founding partner of Cavalry LLC and former Chief of Staff to Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who has been in the middle of all of this. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm glad to see your faces and glad that everybody is healthy and strong right now.
Thanks, Chris.
Good morning.
So let's start, guys, by talking about where we are as it relates to the congressional response to date to this crisis. Josh, I want to begin with you. You've been in a lot of these circumstances from a sort of major crisis perspective. Obviously, this is something that is wholly unprecedented in that perspective, but challenging times in DC are not anything new to you over the years. Can you share with our membership and those who are listening just how to put this situation in context, and tell us a little bit about what you see as the mood here in Washington on Capitol Hill within the administration? I know you've been in contact with the leader and with others as they've gone through the negotiations to date.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I mean, this is, just to put it in context, I know that this feels differently in different places throughout the country, depending upon how your communities have been impacted and how significantly or how far back people have gone into self-isolation. But in context of how this is in DC, having been on the Hill on 9/11 through the Katrina disasters and then in the 08, 09 financial crisis, I can say that all of the various uh, emergency type legislative situations. Really, only those three are in comparison in terms of potential loss of life, the need to act very quickly, economic destabilization. And I would say this is very quickly becoming a first amongst equals in terms of the challenges that it presents. And I think you can see, based on the response that we've had both from the executive and the legislative side, there have been truly unprecedented efforts undertaken to try to address this. And like I said, it's a multi-front war, with what Chris suggested off the top, the most important piece being the health and well-being of the American people. And we have not had pandemics here in an awful long time. And it is a very different world when you try to figure out how to legislate resources that, frankly, our system up to this point hasn't been built to operate within. But I think that they're doing that as we speak. And Chris, I don't know if you want me to go into the specifics of sort of how this latest package has come together, or basically the sequencing, but I'm happy to do that if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I think also in the context of those packages and how they've come together, Josh, maybe a little bit about what we might expect going forward. This is probably 3.0. The latest is probably not the last. So maybe give a little context there, just from a framing perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, this is very different than the financial crisis in '08, in that there isn't one sort of big answer that solves the immediate infrastructure problems that we can then move on and build on top of. This is going to be a rolling effort. I think you saw Secretary Mnuchin say several weeks ago, this is going to be an inning by inning operation. The first was the $8 billion that tried to help infuse as much of the medical equipment and testing as possible. The second was that Pelosi-Mnuchin effort undertaken a week ago that has since been signed into law. And the third now is a much larger piece, and I can give you the derivation for how we've gotten to this particular package, which is when the House was putting the finishing touches on the phase 2 or inning 2 piece. Senator McConnell had concluded that, given the deteriorating health situation, it may not be possible to reconvene the United States Senate after passing phase 2. And so what he asked all of his chairmen to initially do is find as many bipartisan proposals and work with colleagues across the aisle to lay in place a phase 3 that they could pass before they were to get out of town. Knowing that it is quite possible that both the House and the Senate are unable to reconvene for a month. And so it has to be something that would be substantial enough to stabilize the economy when we basically don't have anybody going to work. And what he wanted to do is concentrate the efforts into 4 main buckets. The first was workers who'd either been laid off, furloughed. We're talking of retail, folks that are in restaurant business, small business, anything sort of in the Main Street type realm where no foot traffic, absolutely nobody's getting paid. And we saw huge numbers of unemployment claims start to file in this week. And that first bucket with direct payments to Americans who quite frankly need it in order to pay their rent was the first bucket he wanted folks to focus on. The second is the small business piece of it, which is to try to help those employers retain as much of their employees as possible to try to ride out the storm. Clearly, the margins in a whole lot of different areas of work across this country are small and small enough where it is impossible without substantial assistance. And so there's a fairly large $400 billion fund, a combination of grants and loans for small businesses to access as a part of this deal as well. Third part clearly is health. Where can we build upon where we've been in the first 2 in terms of making sure that we are continuing to flood the marketplace with as many testing, access to tests as possible, face masks, ventilators, anything that we can do from a federal government standpoint to ensure that our medical community and our hospitals are in a position to tackle the virus as it spreads across the country. And the fourth is just a sort of general economic stabilization. And that's everything from the biggest of the big businesses to just sort of the pieces of commerce like airlines and transport that are key pieces to our economy, but quite frankly, shut down for any long period of time, cannot maintain a workforce whatsoever, let alone the infrastructure that is required to keep things like planes maintenance and those kind of things. And so those four buckets were kind of the key to where this thing started, and it has grown out from there over the last week to a deal announced at 1 o'clock this morning that there will be convening here in about 45, 50 minutes and hopefully pass this afternoon out of the Senate.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. That's helpful overview. And, clearly, I think the leadership that Senator McConnell has provided in this has been tremendous. And it's nice to see everyone coming together, although it's, been a little while in terms of a couple of days here on this third piece. Army, let me bring you in, and we want to go deep on sort of the specifics, and particularly as it relates to ALU members and their clients. But can you, just building on what Josh laid out, give us sort of the top line on the three packages in terms of kind of major provisions associated with relief, and then we're gonna want to dive more deeply into particular pieces of that. Specifically, I know the small business piece is a big concern for the membership and how to access some of those resources. So why don't you start sort of high level, and then let's sort of divide and conquer on some of these pieces.
Sure, Chris. Good morning, everybody. As Josh said, phase one was really two parts. It was about $8 billion and direct funding, mostly on healthcare provisions. The other big piece was an initial drop in the bucket, frankly, on Small Business Administration loans, which are already being processed out into the economy. That was about $7 billion in new loan authority for the Small Business Administration. And I know we've already had another question about it, and we'll get into it more, but AALU Gamma published a memo from our team yesterday describing what the steps are to apply for those loans. That was in your email yesterday morning. We'll be sure to circulate it again, and it'll be in the Action Center. Phase two was the Mnuchin-Pelosi deal that Josh described. That one was mostly focused on new sick leave benefits and FMLA benefits for employees affected by C-19. That was substantial new requirements on employers, but also came with refundable tax credits for those employers to cover those costs. And there's another memo we prepared that describes sort of what those requirements are on your businesses and your clients and how to access those tax credits. Phase three, we're still waiting on the final text. I think there was a draft we saw moments ago that at several hundred pages we haven't had time to digest yet. But what we know so far is it's nearly $2 trillion. The biggest chunks of it are the direct payments to individuals and families that is means tested. And so it's reported publicly $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 married filing jointly, $500 per child. That you'll get the American people will get those payments twice, once in April, once in May, and the phase outs begin just shy of $100,000 in adjusted gross income and are completely phased out just shy of $200,000 in adjusted gross income. The second tranche of Small Business Administration loan authority and grants, it totals in around $367 billion in this phase three package. There's $150 billion in direct aid to state and local governments, $130 billion, I believe, to hospitals, a large $500 billion Treasury administered critical infrastructure and of the economy. This is sort of the big business bucket. And there are a series of oversight and restrictions on anybody who takes that money, and we'll be detailing those in the coming days in full. But the basics are the things you've seen in the press. There'll be a limitation on stock buybacks until the loans are repaid. There'll be some sort of comp restrictions as relates to that. That'll be somewhere between the original draft, which was you can't increase anybody's pay, to something more stringent that Democrats in the House had been asking for. And we'll have to read the text and we will get back to you with the details on that. The other big piece in this phase 3, of course, is unemployment insurance. And those are sort of the big buckets. There's a whole variety of other things, from retirement relief and some other pieces we can talk about later that are in there. And we'll be getting a full and detailed report out to the membership as soon as we can.
Great, thanks, Army. Josh, I want to come back to you though on sort of the next phase of this as we think about it. I think I just saw something where the Senate may be recessing now once they get through this till the end of April. What's the 4.0 looking like at this point from your perspective? Is there a chance they come back before that point, given sort of where we are in the trajectory? A little perspective there might be helpful.
Sure, you bet. And one of the reasons why this is such a race against the clock, not only to try to get liquidity in the hands of individuals and businesses while we basically sit at a standstill. The other reason is, quite frankly, the health and well-being of not only people across the country, but the membership itself. We saw this week Rand Paul test positive for COVID-19. There are a total of 5 Republican senators who are self-quarantined. That's not going to get better. What we know about this pandemic is it spreads everywhere. And the idea that you could safely convene Congress over this period of time, I think, is belied by the fact that there have been several positive diagnoses amongst members. There's several in the House as well. Some who've been hospitalized, and at least one in fairly serious condition. And so the ability to try to get this done with that backdrop clearly had the clock ticking. But it doesn't change the sort of inning by inning, phase by phase nature of this. And Chris, what you mentioned is like, what does a phase 4 look like after you pass the largest assistance in American history in phase 3? And I think the answer to that is what happens when we get through the most critical health components of this, when we hit the top of the ebb sort of this graph that we've seen so much about over the last few days, and start to begin coming down in terms of new infection rates. At that point, what we'll want to do is all of the economic pieces that we've helped undergird with phase 3, we'll want to re-stimulate to try to kick forward to get as much of the economy that we knew it as of the end of February back in May, to the extent that that is possible. What you would look at for things like that are what the president initially talked about with the payroll tax cut. I don't know if that is still a live option, but it is in that category of things where you sort of generate immediate liquidity and try to basically kickstart this economy back going again. It will be, again, large. I don't think it'll be as large as this. So I don't know that we can afford to try to do phase 3 again, but it will be specifically directed to try to kickstart the economy once we get through the health component.
Chris, let me jump in real quick. I think one of the points Josh made, that we talk a lot about with the legacy ALU members is, the fact that the members have a human component. And there's, as I talk to chiefs and members in the last 4 or 5 days, there's the same sort of palpable fear and uncertainty around, gathering in large groups, just the same that you're having in all your communities. There was a whole House discussion around remote voting, which I feel reasonably confident in telling everyone will not occur. But I think that's derivative of the demographics of the House body and bringing them all together. And so we'll see. There's been a lot of discussion just in terms of timing. As Josh said, the Senate will vote on this package, we hope, today and clear it. There had been discussion in the House about clearing it under unanimous consent I really don't think that's going to occur because I think one of the members, and you've seen some of the ultra liberals and some of the ultra conservatives express concern around this package. That may lead to a voice vote, but in terms of timing, if you're concerned about when does this get to the president, if they have to bring the House members back for a vote, once they make that decision, it'll be another 24 hours.
Yeah, great context from both of you. So let's, Army, before we go to some of these questions, which I want to dive in on from the membership, and we're getting a bunch, can we talk a little bit about what we've been doing from an advocacy perspective? I think it's important for the membership to understand that while we are remote and, as everyone is, and having, our own dynamics and challenges associated with that, we are still in contact with folks on the Hill. We are in contact with our industry colleagues. We are doing everything that we can to make sure that the voice of the ALU membership and Gamma membership is represented on the Hill. That some of the questions or concerns that we've received from the members are being integrated into our advocacy operations and discussions. And we've in fact signed on to some letters that have gone up to the Hill, and we've also collaborated with our ACLI colleagues and others on thinking about what comes next. So maybe you can just give an overview of the advocacy army, and then we can go into some questions here.
Sure. So I think it really sort of falls into three buckets. As Chris mentioned, in our ongoing work around retirement security, we were part of a broad coalition that signed a letter last week recommending some common disaster relief retirement provisions that Congress usually takes following disasters of much lesser magnitude, allowing penalty-free withdrawals out of qualified plans and a series of other things. Some of those we believe are in the phase 3 package, and we'll know for sure once we get through the entire ledge text. But that's pretty common, and we were glad to support that effort to grant greater liquidity to middle-class homes. Working with the ACLI and our other sister trades, we're certainly, one of the responses we haven't talked about here, we've been focused on the legislative response, is of course the Federal Reserve response. And both the quantitative easing, which is not what we're calling it this time, but the bond buying channels, as well as lowering the interest rate effectively to zero, exacerbates a challenge for our carrier partners that allow us to continue serving clients all across the country. And so we've been working really closely, Mark with Susan Neely, Chris with Joyce Meyer, his counterpart, and I with mine at ACLI, about what else can go into phase 3, phase 4, that might help alleviate some of that and allow you to continue delivering for clients on a regular basis. A lot of that's still in the works as to what comes forward, but we will absolutely keep you posted on that. And then the other piece that we're increasingly engaged in around solutions and hearing from the membership, which is why it's so important for you to continue to communicate with us, is just the ongoing operations in this new paradigm. Some states, I think we're up to 12 now, have issued, essential personnel only, closing non-essential businesses. Well, your clients think your business is essential, because if they need to access their money or recalibrate their financial plan, they need you to be working. And so, it goes from the Department of Homeland Security to the governors as to who is essential personnel. And we've been hearing about that and working on ways to ensure that you're in the essential personnel game. And then it goes to things like agent licensing and bringing on new advisors or renewing current advisors' licenses so you can continue to serve clients. And so we're working on a variety of lines there in cooperation with our carrier partners to ensure that we can do our best to ensure you're doing your work for your clients every day.
Great. Well, thanks, Army. Let's start answering some of these questions. I think it's important that we get to these and get as many answered as we can. And I'll just say, unfortunately, I think my video has kicked off. Systems seem to be overloaded these days. So apologies to those of you who may not be able to see me. Hopefully you still hear the voice. We're working through all of the dynamics that occur, and these little blips are things that happen. So Army, let me take a couple of these off the top on the small business side. You know, you've talked about some of the particulars, but I think it's important to reemphasize um, accessing small business relief for both our members and their clients. We have folks who obviously represent a number of families selling insurance and managing money. Um, what is it in terms of the resources available on the small business side that they have on the table? How do they access it? What are the steps associated with getting engaged to both understand and uh, get some of that unlocked for them or their members? I know we did a piece on this. Maybe you can just speak specifically to that and anything else from your perspective.
Sure, thanks. I would like to highly recommend that you read the piece that our newest teammate here at AALU Gamma wrote for the membership. Alex Cisneros came to us from Congressman Anthony Gonzalez's office, and he started during the remote fashion. So we're dealing with this on our own side as well, but he's done a great job hitting the ground running in the last week. The loans for small business are up to $2 million. The details, the application process is fairly straightforward. I've actually seen a note from one of our members that their website is down, which I'm sure they will be working to upgrade to take the new flows. And we will certainly work with our partners to communicate that and get that done. But it's up to $2 million. There are requirements principally in the financial services space based on your last year's total revenue. That's how you qualify as a small business in our space. For folks who do investment management, I believe the number is $41 million. And for folks who are purely in the insurance agency and brokerage space, it's $8 million. And so there's an application on the website, and then you can go through it. And so it's there are a bunch of additional details, but I think the important thing is to look at that and engage with us as you go through the process. And if you find things that don't sync up or work on, we'd love to know about it so we can follow up with the appropriate parties. But the first, we're going to have $370 billion in loan availability for small businesses across the economy, and there is reported to be some additional opportunities in the Phase 3 bill that will operate differently as grants, and we'll have to see what those details are, but we'll update the SBA memo for your use and put it out as soon as we can as to how all that stuff can work. The other piece to it is, and I can't project that this will happen, but many of the SBA loans following disaster recovery and relief in the past have been forgiven by the federal government. And so that's always a possibility down the line, but it is a factor to be considered.
And let me ask one other question that's sort of similar in nature from a business perspective, but there's also a lot of our members who have clients who may be non-U.S. Domiciled from a headquarters and sort of perspective, but also have U.S. operations. Is there anything that we have seen in the stimulus package for those non-U.S. companies with U.S. operations that we're aware of in terms of accessing resources?
I haven't seen that level of detail, but I did see the question, and I've already forwarded it along to the team, Chris, so that we can get an answer on that. I suspect that because there's a lot of foreign direct investment in the United States, and certainly senators and congressmen are aware of how important that is in a multitude of communities, my guess is that the assistance will be focused on large employment bases at that level, and so we will get a precise answer to it. But I expect that there will be some provision for it. I would expect there would be.
And Josh, let me bring you in now because I think one of the things I also want to get perspective of and from the membership to hear from you as it relates to our industry. We are an industry that provides for critical needs as they are today, as people are having the challenges that they are having. As you, obviously, we've got strong relationships with Leader McConnell, with a number of our members, a number of members on the Hill as relates to the ambassador program that you're well aware of. Our advocacy model has been strong historically in developing those relationships. Do you feel, at least in what you have seen and heard, Army talked a little bit about our set of asks and the engagement that we've had on the Hill, that this industry, the recognition is there for this industry in terms of its value, its strength, and what we can do and will continue to do to make sure that people are taken care of as we both work through this crisis and come out of it.
No question. You start with the relationships that you've had and built here for over a period of years that are very good, and you have an audience with the folks who are going to be writing what the world looks like after we come out of this. But I think one of the most important components that will come out of this, and I think it will be inevitable regardless of how long we're in this crisis, is what you've heard Mark Caden refer to many times as a middle-class liquidity crisis. I think there is no question that if you look at the financial planning of the American people here, we have seized upon what we now know is a real set of problems, that there are people who do pretty well in this country who don't have any margins, who can't put away and do not have the same kind of financial planning access that many others do. And if they did, we probably wouldn't be looking at $2 trillion bills. We'd be looking at things that are much more modest. And I think once we get, it's hard to even imagine and sort of characterize this when we're still in the midst and probably haven't seen the worst of this crisis. But eventually, when we come out of it, there will be a broader discussion that AALU and Gamma and the leadership within the government relations team will take forward, and which is, how is it that we can help incentivize better financial planning when the sun's out? And we make sure that people are putting money away, knowing that a great economy is not a promise. It is something that does go away, and sometimes under the most unbelievable, previously inconceivable fashions, as we've seen with a global pandemic. And so I think that AALU Gamma is well positioned to lead that discussion, and I expect that the members of this group will have a lot to say about how we helpfully incentivize the American people to get to a point where we do have more middle-class liquidity in this country.
Thanks, Josh. Well said, and I think we are thinking sort of down the road in the same terms. Army, I know we've got a number of other questions. I want to kind of pivot to you, and maybe you can pick off some of those, and we can help the membership better understand some of the things that are on their mind.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions, obviously, about the SBA piece, and the phase 3 bill that our team is reading through now will change some of these components. And so I point you to the email yesterday morning, came out, I think around 10:30, 11, and it'll be on the Action Center's website today. That's a great starting place around that. And then please engage with us as to what you're hearing and finding, and we'll get you better answers wherever we can. I think we had a question, somebody asked me to repeat the AGI limits on the individual assistance. As I understand them, the phase out begins at AGI just short of 100,000. I think it's 99,000. And it phases out completely at like 198,000. And again, those numbers are $1,200 for individuals, $2,400 for married filing jointly, plus a $500 per child credit on top of it. So it's really substantial. And as we understand the press reports, it was made refundable, and so it will really boost a lot of liquidity in that sort of low income and middle income categories. So I think that's it. There was a question about delayed implementation of Reg BI. As everybody knows, the SEC's regulation best interest becomes enforceable and effective later this summer. We haven't made a call on that yet, but welcome your input. I know there's been some rumored discussion around it and a couple of press reports Right now, as Josh and Chris have said, everybody's sort of focused on the critical and immediate in March, but we will certainly take that under advisement and continue our work on your behalf.
Maybe as you're looking through some of those additional questions to pick up, one of the things I'll just mention, and please keep submitting those questions to us in the Q&A box. One of the things I'll also mention that we want your feedback on as we go through this time, and we've started it with our board and our committees from a government affairs and policy perspective, is we want to understand the challenges that you're facing outside of just the additional need for resources or accessing things like the SBA program that Army described. We want to know what's happening in the marketplace. We've heard, certain things about there may be challenges at some carriers about accessing policy loans quickly, or I know some have raised concern about the potential limitations for in-person exams in the underwriting process to make sure that that policies are still being placed and underwriting is being done. We are cataloging all of that information. We want that inventory. Some of that may actually provide for us the opportunity to better advocate from a public policy perspective on Capitol Hill in 4.0 or beyond. But also, we are here with our carrier partners, with the Issues Alliance partners that AALU has, and now Gamma and NUCO have, to be a bridge, to be an organization that helps facilitate conversations if you're having challenges. So I would just encourage all of you to reach out. I know Army did as well, but on those types of marketplace issues and challenges, because we want to get through those together, and our community will become stronger if we work together in that process. So just wanted to make sure everyone was clear and aware of that. Army, other questions that we can tackle from the membership?
Sure. So we had a question about furloughing employees and whether that impacts your ability to get aid. The short answer is it may impact some types of aid, and we'll know that better when we get through reading the bill today. We know from press reports and some of the conversations we've had on the Hill that some of the different channels are have different strings attached to them, and some of them are based on maintaining payroll, because the idea from Leader McConnell and Leader Schumer all the way through, and the president, is really to support the economy at every level. That goes equally to there are different requirements for different buckets of money. The $500 billion essential businesses to the economy, which is where the airlines fall, and those other sort of big business pieces. Those are the areas in which there are comp restrictions. As far as we know to this point, the comp restrictions do not relate to the SBA loans.
Right.
There was a question about the unemployment insurance and whether that applies to independent contractors and self-employed individuals. Typically, and again, we have to read the bill, typically unemployment insurance doesn't cover those people, but they would, if in the appropriate adjusted gross income brackets, benefit from the $1,200, $2,400, $500 payments that will come in April and in May. Lastly, we had a question about the age of children. Again, it's going to depend on the bill text, which we are currently digging through, and we will get you an updated report as fast as we can. I did see a Twitter debate between some tax reporters late last night that suggested the age cutoff may be 17. Again, I want to emphasize today that we're giving you the best information we have at this moment, but we have not finished reading a several hundred-page piece of legislation that was released minutes before we got on with you. So it's really important to stay tuned to those updates from the AALU Gamma team on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and really focus back for the latest and greatest information at the COVID Action Center on our website.
Yeah, and I would just say, as it relates to 3.0, we're going to follow up and have another webinar as we dig deeper. So look out for the registration for that in terms of part two. Josh, I know you had some other thoughts you wanted to share on some of these items, so I'm going to give you the floor here to provide some additional commentary.
Yeah, Army covered one component, but I'll put a little meat on the bone in terms of payroll. One of the pieces of this in the small business is this Rubio negotiated package, and one of central tenet of it was in the small business loan area that you would have forgiveness for payroll. And one of the things that had hung up this package over the weekend was in that larger $500 billion economic stabilization fund, whether there would be stabilization or whether there would be forgiveness for payroll allotted to the larger companies. I'm not sure how that's shaken out. In fact, as of 23 minutes ago, the text on that is still not finalized. So we'll have to see how it is. But suffice it to say, I think there is a realistic possibility that there is a significant difference in terms of your forgiveness with a number of these programs in the small business loan area, because the entire structure of this package was to try to incentivize the retention of employees, not just because of the economic component to it, but also because of most people's healthcare is tied to that. And one of the downstream impacts that could be absolutely devastating here is if you've got a pandemic sweeping the country and people don't have healthcare coverage. And so, at this point, I think that's what they've tried to incentivize all along. I'm sure that will show up in the final text of the small business. It may be a part of everything.
Great, thanks. Josh, helpful. Other questions that we can answer, Army, anything else that you see that's flagged of importance as we
I think,
wind up here?
Chris, I think as far as the typed questions, we've covered a lot of them. There's some significant detail questions around, again, the provisions of phase 3, and all I can say there is that again, we'll do the updated webinar Chris talked about, and we will get you a written piece that has hopefully as many of these answers as quickly as we can come by them. So.
Great. Well, listen, I want to give a couple of announcements around sort of what's coming that's important. But before we do that, Josh, I want to give you the opportunity for some sort of last comments here as we think about what's going forward. As I started this conversation earlier, you've been in these rooms up close and personal in terms of the negotiations on a variety of things. Obviously, this crisis is more challenging and broader economically and personally for all of us, but maybe some perspective about the leaders on the Hill, folks in the White House, from a confidence building perspective, as our members think about what's in front of them and work through some of the challenges and keep business moving. What is it that you can leave them with over the coming weeks as it relates to this crisis that we're currently facing in terms of the leadership that's at the helm?
Yeah, well, let me just say, just when you're absolutely confident that Washington couldn't figure anything out, you see a crisis like this and you put together not one, not two, but three fairly unprecedented pieces of legislation in an unbelievably condensed period of time. You see the executive basically restructuring the infrastructure of the entire American health system. All these things are happening in real time with an unprecedented crisis. We are going to figure out how to get through this. It is, in my view, nowhere near the end, and I'm not sure that we're near the worst of it at this point. There is a very delicate balance that's happening. You can see the discussion happening nationwide about at what point do you decide to reopen this economy and try to get folks back into the workforce and more upon normal life. I think if you look across the globe and look at what's happened to countries starting in China and South Korea and then sweeping through Europe, Italy, and beyond. This is a very difficult decision. And the health ramifications here are very serious. It is not only restricted to the most elderly and most vulnerable. This is hitting folks across the board, and it is taxing our healthcare system entirely. I mean, it's my view that we ought to take caution in ensuring that we understand what that bar graph or what that graph can look like in this country before we make any decisions in terms of putting people back out into the workforce. Again, I know that like Wyoming and Iowa are very different than New York City and New Orleans and Miami, the places that we see the hotspots now. But this is something that is going to sweep the country. And I think both on the state and local level and their ability to interact with federal leaders, we've got a real-time understanding at this point that there is not going to be sort of a one-size-fits-all operational business as we go through the month of April. I think you're going to see different areas of the country handle this differently, as they should, because it's not everywhere is going to have the same kind of population concentration and therefore problems that a New York City is having right now. All that being said, I think you can take great confidence in knowing that despite maybe all-time record partisanship in terms of people being at each other's throats, they've processed these things in a very sober way, a very quick way. And you got to remember, this is what we're looking at right now is the single largest rescue package in the history of the country. And so these are no small beans that we're dealing with either.
Yeah, absolutely. Army, any more questions before we close with some comments here?
Last question was coming back to the sick leave requirements and package. Again, we produced a memo on that yesterday to the membership, but effectively employers with less than 500 employees are now required to provide to COVID people who are sick or caring for people who are sick with COVID-19 2 weeks paid leave and partially paid FMLA leave, and that comes with refundable tax credits to the business. There's nothing specific to do for those tax credits as of the way they were passed last week. They would just be filed on your 2020 return, and you would get it back that way. There was some discussion, and we'll see what's in the Phase 3 bill, about giving the Secretary of the Treasury the ability to advance those credits into this year, and we'll get back to you on that and update the memo on that answer. As a final piece, just on timing, because I know that's where everybody's concerned, and maybe Josh wants to wrap with this, and then we'll hear from Chris. The Senate is expected to vote and pass this bill this afternoon. If the House can do it by, I mean, I don't think UC is likely, but a voice vote might be possible sometime tomorrow. Then you could see the president sign it. Because the House members are scattered all across the country in their districts, and then faced in on the return to all the travel disruptions everybody else who's tried to travel in the last 3 weeks has faced. It'll take 24 hours to get them back if they have to come back, in which case we would see it signed sometime Friday. But the SBA piece is already in the works, so if you want to make that application, the money that is provided in this Phase 3 bill will continue funding the applications that are already in the queue at this point.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Army. So I want to thank both Army and Josh for all of their time this morning in the midst of all of this. I want to thank all of you for tuning in. I know we haven't answered everyone's question specifically, but we will answer those that have been submitted, and we ask you to keep them coming. We encourage not just the questions, but also the feedback, as I mentioned, relative to marketplace challenges, so that we can be an advocate, as we are here at ALU Gamma, to make sure that you have what you need and our community is strong. The thing about these times is that they are not only challenging, but there are also opportunities for us to lead. And we have clearly a group of leaders. That's how we define ourselves with our organization. And we are sure that we're going to get through this together. We have, as I mentioned, our COVID-19 Action Center up, navigating the crisis together. We have a webinar tomorrow, Managing Leading Through COVID-19. Financing IT Operations Management, Leadership and Opportunities at 11:30 a.m. So for those of you interested in that topic, please register through our website. We will also, as we've talked about, follow up with a further webinar on the specifics on this 3.0 package so that you can get additional questions answered, and we'll continue to put out content that is valuable. Next week, Mark Caden, who is our CEO at ALU Gamma, will have a conversation with Susan Neely, who's the CEO of the American Council of Life Insurers, to talk about what carriers are doing, and I think that's going to be extremely beneficial and valuable on April 1st. What I'll say in final comments is just wishing everyone continued safety and health. We are here as a resource. We hope that we can meet those needs in a way that is timely and effective, but we are working really around the clock, as I know all of you are. So please stay safe, stay healthy. Your families, your businesses, your clients are in our thoughts and prayers. And we thank you, as always, for the engagement of you as ALU members, but more importantly, what this profession means to the American people. So with that, I will sign off. And again, thank you all, and we will be in touch.
Thanks.